Hi, I'm Ambika, but I also go by Computational Mama, and I'm really excited to be here. So I was a fellow in 2021, so for me this is fairly very precious to be back here. And I'm also very excited to be in the same space as Tega, who has been a big inspiration for me. And I think I was in the same fellow cohort as her sister, I believe. Um, and I'll just kind of give you a sense of what I've been thinking about code education as I've been practicing it in informal learning spaces. By informal, I mean workshops that I conduct with friends or on my own, live streams, the communities we are building, what other things come under this sort of larger umbrella when we say education. Uh, and kind of looking at it from a perspective of like I only have a bachelor's, I never got my master's, and now I'm at a space where not having a master's is not allowing me certain visas or jobs. So I also find it interesting to like balance that idea out, though it doesn't bother me so much, but I feel like it's so silly. But anyway, so we'll get on with it. So I've been looking at this idea of what it means as a practice of care, but like I don't know whether I'm looking at it as code or coding, but the idea is that the practice and the process are more important for me and for whoever I'm kind of working with or collaborating with than the output of the product. But in context of how this works out is I live in Udaipur, which is a very small town in India, which is in the west. We've got beautiful lakes. We are sometimes called the Venice of the East. We are probably like the best tourist spot in listed in all the big magazines. And I live with my son, who's now 6.5, my mom, 62, and this is my grandmother who just turned 90, 91. There's kind of some debate. And my partner, of course, lives in Amsterdam. And I think this whole idea of like care comes from how we are also balancing our lives living apart because of these visa issues. But my journey actually started as a museum designer. Maybe some people know this, some people don't. I used to build really big museums, spanning like 100,000 square feet, right up till 1,200 square feet, which is a biggish apartment in most European cities, I feel. So, and the idea is that in all these contexts, we are talking about these living communities who we've been speaking about. It's not old things that you've dug up in the past and like slapped into a museum space. Here you see on the left is they are a community of folk singers, very active, very much part of the current and the living spaces we are part of. And then we build a museum around their journeys, kind of focusing at how things have become contemporary and not just kind of being nostalgic about the past. And these are some of the ideas that I kind of sort of have brought back in direct and indirect ways. But I think to set us off in this plane, I've always found that sometimes you need somebody else to hold your hand. And I really liked, some years ago, I read this book called The Care Manifesto. It was a very large kind of a read in terms of like what different kinds of things define care. But I feel like for our sakes, I think it's enough to say that it's about nurturing what is necessary for the welfare and flourishing of life. And sometimes I feel like people find care to be like, it's like tending a garden, but maybe it's not always like that. Sometimes when your mom gives you tough love, even that works. So I feel like it's for us to kind of define what care can mean for us. And I think we can progressively figure those things out together. But I think I've now been able to split it into two parts in terms of like how I'm kind of looking at it in terms of facilitating and looking at code education. So one is more explicitly figuring spaces and forms of care. This is an old project. I've spoken to Raf quite a bit about it. It's called Coding with Friends, which was also part of the foundation. I did the second season thanks to Processing Foundation's fellowship. So I was looking at the idea of what it would mean to bring two women together who are coding, who are makers, may not necessarily be coders, and like we are sweating it out together, we are failing, we are enjoying ourselves, we are laughing. And this idea that anybody can code and it can happen anywhere. So like here, Nanditi and my Nanditi is my work partner, we are sitting on the floor in her living room, and we did a live stream. We are not wearing sweatshirts. We are both wearing a very typical, like daily wear of in India, which is called a kurta. And they are cotton, so it's very daily wear. It's not formal or anything. So the idea is that what can you do together when you're sitting together and coding, and then it's not necessary that it comes up with a really amazing looking thing. Maybe we just like did like four primitive 3D kind of things, and we just tried a bit of FFT. But the idea is that then anyone can then try this. There's no limitation to what kind of a creator or what kind of a person you are. And I always like to share this slide, which I did in the first season with Deepika. Deepika is an artist. She paints, I think now she's into sculpture, but she used to paint with oil paints. And I think I really love this image because in the middle of the stream, her son, who had two other carers, including a father, still felt it was important to come and ask his mother permission to have ice cream, which I found so endearing and I think very close to my own practice and my own general life. And it gives you the sense that, okay, there's this like block of code open, but still this kind of stuff is happening. And again, it's like kind of creating this very, very strong optic of like what it means to code. So here again, I have Vaibhavi and Nanditi, and Yugen is also there. And I don't know if the GIF is working. I don't know. Did it work? Yeah. Okay, cool. So this kind of turned out to be very interesting. But most of the people who came on were non-coders. So it had its own kind of flavor and variety of what like a beginner can do when learning code. So, and every time we took a small subject, like say here with Vaibhavi, we did PostNet, sometimes we did FFT, we did speech to text, like with the small P5 library called SpeechTech. We've even done very basic things like here's an array and I just want to like line up a couple of pictures. So, and then I was like, okay, what can I do to extend this idea? And by which time I thought it would be good for me to like push through the fact that, people were getting to know me. So I did this like series of podcasts with a lot of amazing creative coders from across the world. And then for each of them, I had a thought of why I'm interviewing them. So for example, I did it with Dan. Of course, Dan, everyone knows, is like, everyone's learned from his YouTube videos. So, but I spoke to him about his notions of care at his home, care of his dog, care of his family, care of the students. What does that mean to him? How does he kind of bring it up in his spaces? I spoke to Keel. Keel was an educator for a really long time, and then he became, I think he's now a full-time studio practitioner. He also has, I think, 3 kids, and then how they manage things. And I think it was like kind of middle of COVID. So he was talking about how they kind of manage their home, what that means to them. Kate Sikio, very well known in the live coding community, looking at care in terms of what happens when she goes with her child to a live coding gig, and how do the others in the gig help her manage the little kid. And that was really interesting to me. And I feel like this constantly comes to us as a form. I feel like this is a form of accessibility that sometimes we maybe don't talk about, like how do people in positions of care come to spaces, and what are the things we're doing for them to come into the spaces that we are already building. So like, for example, yesterday night, we had a live coding gig in Delhi, but I couldn't go because my son was sick. But still, there was a space for me to like co-code live with the person that I code with, Nanditi, usually. And that's kind of now embedded within these practices. And I feel like for me, these are also part of like educating yourself or others about what you can do with code, how you can code, things like that. And then just keep a like sense for me on time, please, Raf. I don't want to like overstep. Okay. Yeah. So
5
then I was like
minutes.
looking
6.
at, yeah, okay, perfect. So I was looking at what are these implicit forms of care as well. So, like coming together in the class, waiting for people, or like if they don't turn up, then not like stressing out about it, or like making them feel stressed out about it. Whatever those simple things might be, or something like, I don't know, I don't want the audio to play. Maybe I'll just shut it. So this is a small workshop I did in Utrecht, which is close to Amsterdam, where we were looking at PostNet and poetry. And then this idea that in the workshop, you can it's a coding workshop, but that doesn't mean that people are like always sitting and like hunched over their computers. What are the fun things that they can do together? So like the idea was to challenge them to do one poem on their own, but then do another poem where there are two people's poses being recognized. And then this is more recent. Me and Nanditi, Nanditi is my studio mate. We started this program called Code Drift, and Code Drift is basically Nanditi does Sonic Pi, which is a open source software for music, which is live, which you can use in live coding, and I use P5. Uh, and we look at like this, we go around as a group through the city, and we collect sights and sounds from the city, and then we come back and we make a joint cityscape together. So our idea was that uh, as we are seeing more and more live coded stuff around everywhere, there is a certain aesthetic even in the sound and then the visuals. And what can we within our local communities like change about that? What can it mean to us? And and then I think for us that extension went to a much larger idea. Like in India, sitting on the floor is very, very common, and I think it brings together people at an equal plane. So for us, that was a key part of how we started establishing the facilitations, where you are all sitting together on the floor if you can. And the workshop and there is no kind of boundary between where the participant is and where the facilitator is. So we're all sitting together closely, we are, moving across. But it also extends to the fact that, like, for example, here on the extreme right, these are the two people who helped us host the workshops. So for us, even the space is important. Who is willing to give us that space and like accepting us within those ideas of what can be done within those spaces. So it's a very sweet cafe. We did it in two places. One was a little hostel kind of a space, and one was a like a traveler's hostel, and the other was a cafe. And I think it gave us a sense of, okay, where are the places we can do these coding workshops? Because maybe we don't want to do them in a college which or a university which has got tables and chairs, and maybe we where there are restrictions and maybe you have to sign in and sign out of sheets. We don't want to do it in a fancy looking conference room. What does that mean to us? So even if the space has tables and chairs, we physically remove everything and then we place everyone in that space. So it gives us a sense of being able to like change how you're thinking about your own learning experience. And we are very focused on using terminologies where we don't come across as teachers and they don't come across as students. Everyone is participating. We are facilitating. That's about it. And then we've been really lucky that this team, this cohort of now maybe 25 odd people have sort of come together on their own nodally and with us. And someone floated an idea of a performance at the German embassy in Delhi. And everyone just turned up. So that was yesterday. So here again, you can see that there's another participant, Samira, and her live coding partner couldn't make it due to her, some issues. So we were able to bring in another person from the cohort who came in and did it from another city, while the two of them coordinated on a phone call that, okay, now I'm going to change the set. Can you just like change your visuals? So it's really interesting to see how these things are coming together and how they're kind of bonding through these experiences, which are focused around the idea of code. And it's giving space to many women who feel like they don't identify themselves with what coding can bring to their lives. And for us, I think me particularly, I feel like it's kind of like an intrinsic creator language now. There is no, as someone who's come from a design background, I think Rafi would agree too, that it's as good as using Adobe or any other software, like for me right now. So yeah, so that's how we've been thinking about it. And then, we kind of at the end of it, we all go out together and, we have a nice meal. So the idea is that, you're extending this proposition with a little bit more, like you're giving yourself in a friendly way to them, and they in turn are able to also do that. There's no sort of boundary that, okay, the class is over, now I go my way and you go your way. I mean, this can be really, really stressful sometimes because it's so like so much energy goes into this, but we allow it. Sorry, I know I'm running a little late on time, but I'll try to be a little bit faster. So then I kind of figured, and for me, many things come retrospectively. I don't really think about them, and then later when everything's happened, I think I can see where it's fitting. So I found through my partner this idea of lambang, which was proposed at the Documenta 15, which by Ruang Rupa, who's an artist collective from Indonesia. So they're looking at lambang as a practice that enables alternate economies of collectivity, shared resource building, and equitable distribution. Lambang is anchored in the local and based on values such as humor, generosity, independence, transparency, sufficiency, and regeneration. So for us, these are important parts of our community spaces that we are building, and that's how we like to keep them as well. And what we can learn from our daily practices and pass it on to our pedagogy is important. So I already spoken about this a little bit. What are these kind of non-Western practices and spaces where code and coding can happen? And why is it important to look at care work in context of code education? Who can code, how you can code, and where you can code? So I have a bunch of questions, but I leave it to the organizers to pick the ones that you might want to like take on. How might we think of code education in non-didactic ways? How can who can learn? How can you learn code? What is the practice of coding mean to you? What are the spaces we can code in, and what are your daily practices that can inform the coding education?
Cameras on. Love it. Cool. So yeah, I hope the breakouts were enlightening. You're gonna have how much time did we say? I'm sorry, I lose track of the schedule. But yeah, each of you get a minute or two, say, to give us a share on the conversation, and each group should have a spokesperson. If you don't have a spokesperson, you should figure it out. And we'll start with Miaoyi, since you were here first, and I already know that you're the spokesperson.
Yeah. Okay. So in our group, we talked about a few things. So David started us off with talking about the importance of the things that are not code that matter for code education. And then we moved on to Ambika, who shared how, like because of caretaking responsibilities or just life duties in general, sometimes it would be hard for them to be fully visible. For example, in Zoom settings, because they had to be mute or turn off their camera. So there's this idea of how do you focus when you have to attune to the needs of another body who share the space with you, and also the importance of using language in a simpler way to bring people into the coding practice. And then later, Rupa and I both have experience interacting with students in a more formal education setting. And most of the time, these are students who come from very diverse backgrounds. So they are not necessarily technical, or maybe they didn't have never tried coding before. So Rupa talked about how we usually have this preconceived notion of coding as a practice where you become very obsessed, like you sitting in front of the computer for hours, and then you have a product by the end. But for students, it's important to understand that you cannot let code distract from what you need as a person. So you shouldn't like sacrifice your sleep or like food or whatever essential nourishment you need as a person. And then there's also this idea that there's no right way of conceptualizing the materials, and we have to always meet folks where they are and try to work together from there. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Then I will call the group. What are the spaces we can code in? Who do you want to have as a spokesperson? We had Anne, Claudine, Dia, Nahi, and Tega. Should I
Oh,
name
yeah, I
someone?
can summarize our
Oh,
discussion if you like.
well, thanks,
Um,
Tega.
we talked about, I guess, the different contexts where we code, and we spoke a lot about the role that community plays and how key that is, right? That you're not doing it alone, and that you really need just folks to share the like kind of emotional parts of learning together. And maybe this, you know, it's something I don't think is sort of really discussed enough, is that that emotional dimension. And then what else did we talk about? We talked about, yeah, like if you can get to a place where programming kind of becomes a comforting, safe space, how useful that is. Because, you know, the problems are defined, and if you have a project that where you're, you know, halfway through developing it, you can kind of jump in there and it's a relief from doing a different activity like writing or like, you know, something more creative where there are less constraints, and how wonderful that can be. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Then we have who can learn to code. And do we have who wants to talk about who can learn to code?
I can go.
Go ahead.
So we began by just like sharing like all of our experiences with like our backgrounds as how we learned to code. And then me and Dora had like a formal computer science education, where Buffy and Luis kind of either learned by like got into it by like teaching themselves or like through like other avenues like design. So we talked about like comparing that. Dora like brought up that being like especially in like a male dominated setting in like a computer science like degree program, like how that was like kind of different. And I like kind of felt that like also computer science like program is like very constricting in that like what it prepares you for and like what the general like student like population's goals are in terms of like working as like having a career as a software engineer and like working in like a corporate setting, and how like we kind of like began like exploring like other more creative avenues of coding like by ourselves or like just like finding that like those communities with like non-engineers, and then like discuss kind of like coding as like a tool that you use rather than like a software engineer as an identity, and like kind of the difference of that, and like how often like having that constricted identity of like being a software engineer like can make coding intimidating to people who like just like artists, maybe they just want to use it like to do a specific task. And then like Buffy brought up like especially like learning to code as a trans woman, like how like typically software engineering space and like software is very like cis male dominated, and how like she brought up this like very great point of how like often these like structures are and these people are like kind of like responsible for like maintaining code and like maintaining software that like runs the world, but um like trans women will often be known for like in like the arts or like even like in like technology known for like disrupting and like innovating and being at the forefront. She brought up the musician Sophie and described Sophie as like a coder, and just like yeah, like thinking about like who, even though like software is like often run and maintained by like a specific like hierarchical group of people, like who actually like creates the change in the long run, that's like remembered.
Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful thoughts from everybody and ideas. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I guess we are gonna have a short break now. Do I remember correctly?
Yes.
And yeah, and after our break, we will have a presentation by Tega, who is the author of this wonderful book here. And so I'm very excited for this presentation. I hope that everybody has read the required readings that Tsige shared. That was also very interesting. And yeah, so we have, what was it, 10 minutes?
Yeah, so for those who don't know me, I am an artist. I also have a background in engineering. So I've thought a lot about working in interdisciplinary ways and what it means to come to the arts from a technical background. I'm also a professor at NYU in the Integrated Design and Media program, and I teach a lot of computational art and design classes here. In my art practice, I often, recreate systems of technology in slightly different ways. I'm currently working on a solar-powered computational network called Solar Protocol. But in preparing with this talk, I also realized that so much of my art practice has a sort of educational dimension. To give you a quick example, I mean, the most, I guess, there we go, change slides. A really kind of direct example of this is, sometimes I teach workshops and actually play with education as a way of producing critique or thinking about who gets access to technology and who is invited into spaces where one can experiment with computation. And so to give you this example, this was a project Bushwick Analytica where I taught a series of workshops in New York public libraries to middle schoolers, and I invited them to harness the power of data-driven advertising. And each kid developed their own targeted ad campaign. And then we launched the ad campaigns on Google's ad service. And the results were super interesting, right? It's like, how do you introduce folks who are like 7, 8, 9 years old to this business model of the internet? And some children, created campaigns specifically trying to target their parents. This Michael created this campaign about getting a dog to try to convince his parents to get him a dog. Or Adam created a campaign about cancelling school on Mondays, also trying to target his parents and teachers. And so I think, thinking about education as sort of an opportunity for creative practices too is something that I'm very interested in. I also, before we jump into the discussion about the book, I've also runs a conference series for a long time called Learning to Teach that has been supported by the Processing Foundation. I launched this conference series in 2016 with Taeun Choi, who is the founder of the School for Poetic Computation. And we really put this series together because we were lacking spaces where we could share and talk about what we were doing in our classroom, in our curriculum, share what was working, share what wasn't, and also sort of come together to talk about present contemporary issues that we were dealing with in our teaching practices. Teaching is a surprisingly private undertaking sometimes. Of course, you're in a classroom with your students, but rarely do we observe each other teaching. Rarely do our universities at a tertiary level invest in our skills and pedagogy as teachers. So this conference series is really trying to address that. In the last couple of years, it's been led by D'Angela Duff, who's one of my colleagues here at NYU. And I believe there's going to be another iteration of it that's going to be dealing with creative tech and generative AI. And I think she's planning to run that in January. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in attending. Maybe you have a case study or something you've tried in a classroom, or you're just interested in learning more. Everybody's welcome. And so, yeah, teaching and technology, they really do mean so much to me. And that is why I spent many, many years writing this book with a dear colleague, Golan Levin, who's at CMU at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. And it really is our response to how to teach code in art and design context, drawing on our experiences and the practices we were seeing in our community. I stumbled into this field and my work as an artist from engineering. I left my engineering job in 2007. And I really didn't have a creative practice. I got really lucky, and one of the first classes I took when I started dabbling in some arts education was a processing class. And I just had this incredible awakening that code and technical education didn't necessarily have to lead to a career in the engineering industry. I didn't have to be a consultant, right? These skills could also be applied for creative expression, for discourse, for critique. And indeed, this is what processing, I think, has done for so many in our community. It's a way of like making work where the goal is expression, critical inquiry, work that engages with ambiguity, contradictions, that gives way to questions rather than trying to necessarily always solve things with neat technical solutions. And so with this project, we aim to address folks like myself who are coming out of a technical space and trying to develop an art practice, maybe asking, you know, what should I make? But also people going the other way, right? Perhaps artists and designers who had a really robust practice and were curious and interested in bringing code and computing into their work. So we wanted to provide a framework that would address both communities. So for about half a century, computer science has held a monopoly on designing how programming education takes place in universities. However, computer science pedagogies and pedagogies coming out of, you know, more engineering and science STEM spaces are quite narrow and tend to only suit particular kinds of learners. Artists and designers, creative people, learn differently than STEM students. And often these kinds of folks don't do well in traditional CS courses. Leah Beakley is a fantastic educator and artist and designer who's observed this. And she observes that artists and designers are accustomed to learning by making concrete examples rather than studying abstract principles, working in ways that are improvisational rather than planned, and creating things that are expressive rather than utilitarian. So we really found this super useful for framing the way and the contribution that creative coding can make to building computational literacy more broadly. And so our project began around the time of year. It was midsummer, and Golan and I were both at a conference together and sort of anxiously talking about what we were going to put in our syllabi for the year. This was back in 2013, a long time ago now. It takes a long time to write books. And so we were swapping ideas for the upcoming semester, and we both realized that we were going to put this assignment in our syllabus, the classic assignment of creating an experimental clock. I'd been given this by my teachers, and in turn, I was giving it to my students. And through this discussion, we realized that there is this sort of unwritten canon of assignments that were passed down from teacher to student, and that were prevalent, you know, in our peers, in our community, but that it was a history that was sort of undocumented. I hadn't opened a book and seen these practices written about. You know, I'd been taught in Australia, Golan in United States, and even despite the geographical distance, we shared this way of learning. And so so we decided, let's make a handbook that tries to capture what's happening in this education community. And so the book contains creative coding prompts compiled from our field. These are based on project-based learning. So the way that I use the book in my own teaching is, you know, compiling a syllabus from a series of projects, a series of assignments. So the book really does focus on educators. It's useful for students, but much more for educators. And it features assignments that have no right answer, that are very open-ended, exercises that help you hone your sort of technical skills, and interviews from other educators and our peers about what they're doing in the classroom and how they deal with some of the challenges. The book also serves as a kind of archival, serves an archival role. where in putting together the briefs for the assignments, we also put together diverse responses from creators. And so again, we felt this was important given how fragile some of these practices is. There's no code in the book, and we did this to avoid obsolescence. Who knows what different environments we will be programming in the future. So why make a book for teachers? As has been shared, this was a particular text that was so inspiring to us. I remember coming across this book years before we'd even thought up our project. And again, it seemed like such a generous offering of folks sharing their experiences and weird and wonderful prompts that they'd been given in their own experience in art school. To take a quote from the reading I shared, in class, when you're faced with a multifaceted, perhaps insoluble situation that is manifesting itself in unaccountable ways, I think this is something that all educators have experienced at some point or another. You either just go straight out for a drink, or you try and come up with a killer assignment. And we realized what we wanted to do was make a book of assignments. And so again, this focus on the assignment as a backbone of project-based learning became really important and a big inspiration for us. Other sources of inspiration, this text, Taking a Line for a Walk by Nina Palm, Emily Bergmark, and Corinne Giselle. In their introduction, they talk about how teaching and pedagogy is such an oral practice, right? The layer of language that runs alongside this process is often neglected. Words fly out of a teacher or a student's mouth and quickly disappear into thin air. Instructions and specifications, corrections and questions fuse with practical work. And assignments, if written down at all, are rarely considered something worth saving. And so this also motivated their text in trying to document some of these creative pedagogies. Casey Rees also points this out in the foreword he wrote for us, where great artworks get remembered, but not the humble methods of artist training. Our collective online courses are fragile, with more and more of that material lost month by month as URLs and servers change. A lot of syllabi sit behind paywalls, not paywalls, they sit within university platforms and aren't publicly accessible too. So again, trying to open up who has access to these kinds of creative technology education practices. I thought I'd throw in all of our many of our inspirations here in case you're interested in. But this is another collection of texts that really address education and how to teach in art spaces. And again, we looked at a lot of these, thinking about how we might take some of the approaches and the format shared in these texts and translate them into a space dealing with technology and code. They're fantastic. If you're looking to sort of do some more reading around developing an arts education practice, these texts are really, really worth tracking down. And so the book really addresses the question also of how to teach what's worth making and why. We noticed that many texts on many creative coding texts, Casey Rees has written many, Dan Schiffman's written many. These books are fantastic, and I really lent on them when learning these practices, but they do a great job on the how, like lowering the bar to entry, how to deal with certain problems. But with this text, we really tried to move upstream from this question of how and deal with why, what's worth making, what are like persistent conceptual questions that have been looked at in our field. And so, so this is also a big goal with our text. The documentation of art projects in the assignments traces different questions, different themes that have been explored by generations of media artists, and this question of why. And this is also why I shared the Sarah Hendren reading. Why do this stuff, right? How do you lead students to be able to make work that animates questions, that can highlight technology and its politics? And so with the assignments, we'd really tried to offer ways that that one can develop a critical practice and open up sort of black box technologies. Many of the works and prompts also, of course, focus on expression and generative possibilities, ways to awaken new perspectives on the world. And so to give you just a quick sense of what some of these are, classic assignments like make a generator. This particular one is like to make a generative face system. We went through openprocessing.org, we went through archives of syllabus, and we had a giant, overwhelming spreadsheet that documented like every assignment that we could find on places like Open Processing. And we found that a lot of folks were giving this face generator or sort of permutations of this project. This is the spread that's accompanies that assignment, right? Where we collect projects that have different forms and different sort of approaches, different responses to the prompt. And so here on screen, you see work by Heather Dewey-Hagborg, who's critiquing surveillance in the way that DNA data is being used. You also have works like Hyphen Labs, where they're actually created a face generator system that carves faces into aspirin tablets. So these are very, very small faces. That was a work that responded to the American opioid deaths. So this sort of beautiful reflection of the tragedy of opioid use in the US. Another example of one of our assignments, voice machine. And you know, this is an example that invites critical and creative experimentation with machine learning tools, speech synthesis and speech recognition. Again, we collected responses from folks like Stephanie Dinkins, who critiques the way that technologies bring together histories of race, gender, social inequality. We also see more playful projects like Hey Robot by Everybody House Games that invites a critical play with how imperfect voice technologies are and how they so often do not behave in the way that they kind of report to. So we really tried to balance this work that's expressive and playful and whimsical with examples that are critical and revealing. And this is where I find the writing of Sarah Hendren so useful and enriching. Sarah breaks it down into this question of critique or repair. And I love the way that the vocabulary and the way that she describes these two different sort of posts in technology and creative technology practices. She writes, critique unmasks hidden or suppressed realities. It reveals ugly truths. It subverts or even negates mainstream or inherited lazy narratives. So this is a really important thing that I think media arts does, right? It sort of takes the lid off how everyday commonplace technologies works. But then repair suggests new futures and invites possibilities. Perhaps it translates ideas from the past that might be reinvigorated or more accessibly understood. Or perhaps it enchants by asking, what if this new different thing could come to life? And I think we need to be finding ways to teach making work that does both these things or that brings both of these together. I mean, I think that's the goal that I sort of have in much of my work, is to try to do both, right? Suggest an alternative, but also in that suggestion, critique what is the status quo, what is happening at the moment. Yeah, and as she writes about, sometimes you're kind of like towards one post one way, or in another project you sort of lean more on the critique, or yeah, it's hard to get right there in the middle. Since we wrote our book, there's been many projects that have come after that I think do this really well. So I'll just call out a couple. Like this is a handbook of software studies. It's completely open source, so you can just download it from Open Humanities Press by Winnie Soon and Jeff Cox. Fantastic book with lots of thinking around more on the politics of technology. So it's the text is described not only as it relates to the politics of representation, but also non-representation, how power differentials are implicit in code in terms of binary logic, hierarchies, naming of attributes, how particular worldviews are reinforced and perpetuated through computation. So it also has a really rich bibliography of readings that are very useful. And then also the Critical Coding Cookbook by Jin, who is here. Is super inspired by this syllabi and this project that really looks at a way of bringing, feminist approaches to the teaching and learning of creative coding. And yeah, this is based on some core classes that Jin and Catherine Moriarty teach at the New School. So loved to see this work. And then finally, so I think my favorite part of developing the book was interviewing our peers and our colleagues and people we admired, educators we admired. We ask each person a series of questions around what they do in their classroom, how they approach their teaching. Like, how do you encourage a point of view? How do you encourage meaning making, criticality, and heart in otherwise technical education? And I think Taeyoon Choi made a great contribution where he says it's easy to retreat into the mode of like, we're going to help you become a coder, we're going to help you become an expert. But to me, that sounds as thin as we're going to help you become as good as Photoshop. What the real question is, it's finding a desire within students to master the language of technology. It's code, electronics, all of that, but it's really about expressive literacy. I want them to approach code and technology as an artistic medium so that they can overcome the psychological barrier of I can't do this or it's not for me, and be creative. We asked these folks, what do they do in their first day of class? What do you do in that first hour where everybody's nervous and maybe you feel unprepared and flustered? And Winnie Soon really she talks about the politics of the tools being used in the classroom. Choosing a tool is a kind of politics, and I wanted to set the scene that the course is not about picking up something because it's efficient or good and then just using it. I wanted to ask why you are using it and what kind of values are you subscribing to. I think that's quite important. Oh, and sorry that I haven't quite updated this slide. This was meant to be, the question is, what happens on your worst day? So like, what happens on your worst moments in the classroom? And maybe this is just catharsis for me because we all, it's interesting, hearing this group of people talk about the challenges that we all face the same kind of challenges when teaching. And so I pulled this quote from Dan Schiffman, because even Dan, who has spent so many thousands of hours teaching programming, he said this: I have moments where nothing works, where I can't figure it out. And apparently these moments are useful. People tell me this about the coding train videos all the time. Like, my favorite part is when you couldn't figure it out and you got stuck for like 15 minutes because and that's because I like to see that happens to everybody. So even these moments that can be really bad and really stressful are really useful. And so, I think there's a lot of sort of solidarity in what's shared by these folks. And then finally, there's also a little section at the back that we wrote due to the prompting from our editor. Our editor was like, you really need to write some more academic content for this book. We're MIT Press. Where did these assignments come from? I mean, do you know anything about the history? And so we spent a long time trying to trace some of the history of these prompts. A lot of them sort of can be found traced, back in design texts. There are sort of traces of some of these prompts in texts from folks like Bruno Minari. Of course, John Mader in the 1990s in MIT Media Lab did a lot of foundational work. But also, you can trace some of these prompts back through, media arts of the 20th century. So like interactive video works done by people like Kruger in the 70s, sort of inform some of the projects that we see in this text. And so again, this was really challenging. It's very hard to find old syllabi. They die on hard drives, they die on university servers. And so, yeah, I think there could be a lot of lovely future work also to be done on tracing and building better histories of art making in a computational context. And so to wrap up, I think it's really important to build on this observation made by Professor of English and writer Whitney Sperazza. And they state, our understanding of what computational work looks like has become limited because the history of computing has been dominated by figures in STEM fields. But other figures and stories belong in this history too. And so, I think this book is a sort of initial offering of how we might build out this richer history of computing. People have been making art with computers since the very inception of the field, since the very inception of computer science. It's not new, and yet the story of computing does remain dominated by science and engineering. There's another story here of how computing has been profoundly shaped by artists, by tools like processing, by books and communities. We need books. I think we need more texts and projects to kind of engage this too. And so this book is about advocating for and cultivating arts literacies across technical disciplines like engineering and computer science. Just as code literacies have long been deemed essential in the arts, we've all got on board with this, everybody needs to code. Arts literacies are equally valuable and for engaging and working with technologies in ways that are nuanced and culturally situated. And so I think the argument that I'd like to make through this text is that everybody, scientists, engineers, should also learn to think and work through arts practices and through the learnings that come out of arts and humanities. And that's it. Thank you so much. I don't know if I ran over time. I'm sorry if I did.
No, it's actually, I don't know. It was wonderful. I was mesmerized. I didn't even pay attention to the time.
Yeah, I don't see the time here, so
no, we still have time, and we have time for questions as well. I did write a few of my own, but in case people need some time to think of their own. And yeah, I as somebody who studied applied arts and traveled into this technical code world later on, I really appreciate your ending note, and it's something that I think that it's really hard, but I'm really hoping for ways that we can bring more of that creative and art and energy into the tech world, because it really needed, and humanities as well, obviously. I wanted to ask about, like, because you said it took you 10 years to write this book, which is incredible. And also, like, yes, it reminds me of some of, like, the people who have been going around and trying to preserve some kind of folk art or oral tradition that was unwritten, and it's like it has this journalistic, almost ethnographic dimension that is really quite beautiful. But also it makes me wonder, like, does it mean that there's another book is necessary 10 years from now, because more assignments are getting created and they're not better preserved now than they were 10 years ago or before? How do you see how do you see the legacy of the work that you've done, and does it need to be renewed every decade, or is there is there hope for more open curriculums these days that would self-document or self-preserve, if that's even a thing?
I mean, I think, yeah, of course, the ubiquity of publishing everything online has made things a little bit more accessible. But I think these things are still really fragile, right? Like, although I mean, that's the thing with the internet. I think anyone who's taught anything has that experience of you come back the year later and you have this like amazing lecture full of amazing examples, and then like half the links are broken because the artists, you know, changed their website or didn't pay their servers, or they're just over it, or and like, you know, and you have that demoralizing experience of like apologizing to your students as you're trying to show them this interactive online work and you can't. So it's a big challenge. And yes, of course, this book, it was out of date the minute we published it, right? You know, there was a couple of years of us faffing around, kind of forming up the project. There was a few years of us writing the project. Then there was a couple of years of like, you know, publishing is the slowest process in the world. Like, you know, it takes them a year to peer review the text, and then, you know, there's printing delays, and it was during COVID, the final little bit of it. And so it was very slow. And of course, you know, of course now, like we are dealing with these new sort of AI-based tools, and when this book first came out, it was during that like crypto NFT insanity in 2020, and so, you know, doesn't mention that, right? Because the manuscript is finished years earlier. So yes, I think there is definitely space for updates or texts every decade or so. Yes, definitely. I'd love to see more work happening in this way. Yeah.
Thanks. Do we have questions in the room? I have more, but so computational memos writing, I think there's merit to some ephemerality too, no? Question mark.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I love the fact that, you know, Alison Parrish's, all of the GitHubs are available for me to go through and reteach. But I also, like, I can see sometimes, I mean, not with hers particularly, but sometimes, you know, with new cohorts, maybe you need something new. And yes, there's beauty to things of the past, but there's also sometimes something nice about letting go. So like, this book is great now, but like, do we need another book in 10 years? I don't know. I think that's up to Tega though. If she wants to do that
and does it
all
need
over
to be
again.
a book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could be in a format that's sort of a bit quicker or a bit more flexible as well, right? I mean, I loved the cookbook format, Jinjin, that you have played with in your project as something that's a little bit quicker.
We were discussing recently, like the issue of teachers having to teach computer science who may not themselves be, or they put in a position to teach an introduction to computer science, but they may not themselves have much training in that. And how do we support professional development? And maybe it's a little bit out, like it's definitely out of scope for the book, which is serving a different purpose. But yeah, do you have some thoughts about that, and how within or beyond or around the assignments themselves, how could we best support teachers who need to teach computer science, but they might need to teach themselves first?
Yeah, you know, I think the DOE in New York City is an interesting case study for that, right? They have a really, I think, amazing sort of teacher education program, more high school level course, and they're using, you know, P5 and a lot of the tools that we're talking about here. Again, you know, I think the sort of professional development at a university level is something that, in my experience, I've found a bit lacking, right? I think in universities, there's such a focus on research outcomes for faculty, and then teaching is sort of sidelined or less emphasized in one's work. And so, you know, that again, that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this project, is we really were thinking about that arts graduate, the MFA graduate. They've come out of school, they're like, oh my God, I've been given a class, I have to teach it in a week, what am I going to do? And that, you know, we've all probably been that person. And so we really wrote it for that person, right? As like, how do you, how can you create something that's really useful for that person? But yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, I myself have avoided teaching into CS programs because I feel like I'm sort of ill-equipped to, my pedagogy is not that, and it's not my background either. Like, I studied engineering, not CS, so I feel a little bit at sea with the sort of that approach. Yeah, so I don't have good references for you in terms of like where one might turn to find that support.
No, but that you're like sharing your experience is already quite interesting in that regard.
But I think Lauren McCarthy's talked about this a lot in some of her talks too, about how, as a computer science person, how uncomfortable it was teaching with this project-based approach, right? Where you're not so much starting from the technical details, you're starting from like a goal, and then you sort of learn the technical along the way. And I think that's very common, right? I was just having a conversation with a student of mine on Friday who was sharing that exact thing. She's like, this class makes me so uncomfortable. I've come out of CS. What are we doing? And it's really, I don't know. I think that emotional dimension of like jumping into a new discipline is so interesting.
It's fascinating. I mean, I studied, as I said, I studied applied arts. So for me, like project-based sounds completely natural. It's like just that somebody can feel that way. It's like, oh, okay, I need more empathy. I didn't realize that would even be a thing. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. You were saying some things about the critique versus repair article as well that made me also brought a question. I mean, I spend way too much time on social media. It's a problem. I need an intervention. But there's definitely, and in the article, like the repair, I think if I remember correctly, the author discusses how sometimes you might be taxed of being too naive if you're thinking if you're using repair language about how can we fix the world and the problems we see in the world. And that maybe, I mean, and I might be riffing off a little bit on the actual article, but yeah, that's maybe it's easier to be cynical and very critical, and it comes naturally and seems more, maybe people see you as more lucid about things if you're critical than if you're trying to repair. In the context of education, do you see this coming up in the classroom when trying to teach a technological subject? Is it difficult to like, I think you mentioned like how do you kind of thread the needle and stay in the middle or give this nuance? Is there critique coming from students from like, if you're dealing with topics that have been very polarized? I mean, I'm thinking you mentioned NFTs like a few years ago. Now it's AI. There's also a lot of critique coming up, and also a lot of promise, but it's really hard to try and not be like full on one side or the other. I find that personally. But yeah, I'm curious how that comes up in conversations with students.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Sarah, there's a talk that Sarah did for the Media Lab based on some of these blog posts that I also recommend if you want to sort of do a deeper dive. And she very much talks about where you sit with those posts is also quite specific to discipline, right? Engineering is so at home with this repair narrative, right? We think about engineering as creating solutions. I actually, my department's actually in an engineering school, so I have quite a lot of interaction with engineering folks. And the idea that you can make work that's not about solving a problem, that's maybe about highlighting it or provoking conversation, is something that's very, again, not part of the engineering like vocabulary. There's this sort of utilitarian expectation in that field that's really at the heart of it, that I think means that repair idea, that idea that I'm gonna solve this, is the sort of default place, I think, in an engineering context, and yet in the humanities, that's seen as very naive, right? A lot of the kudos or a lot of value is sort of attributed to critique, is to unmasking, is to not jumping to some kind of like quick response. But of course, yeah, like you know, as she writes about, we need to try to blend both and bridge both and have both voices in conversations in the room when things are getting made. But it's very hard, and it slows things down so much. Because yeah, like I think the perspective from either post also feels naive, the other feels naive, right? Like I've had a lot of people, you know, in talks or whatever, say things about projects like Solar Protocol, which is the solar computing one. You know, oh, that's all very great, but like, how am I supposed to implement this? Like, how do I scale something like this? You know, and it's like, well, that wasn't the goal, right? But I'm not trying to solve like energy in the internet through this project. Yeah, you know, so I think like a lot of these tricky conversations that regularly come up, I've found Sarah's vocabulary useful for sort of being able to better understand why everybody's frustrated, right? And why the engineers are finding the humanists naive or out of touch, and vice versa.
Yeah, super interesting. We have a question from Sinan. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, sure. Hello, Tega. So nice to see you again.
Hi.
Something I'm seeing so much is basically it's really the age that students are learning coding. Creative coding is getting younger and younger. And it's amazing. It's so nice to see. But also, I'm also sensing that it puts the teachers in a very weird spot. It's suddenly, well, these kids did not choose to be an artist in the first place, right? They didn't yet choose to be an engineer, so they're still learning almost the basics of the education still. So given that, like, I guess my question to you is like, how do you see any difference in terms of how such teachers who are teaching to a younger group of students, like how their approach should be in terms of your book? Like, does your book speak to, do you think, more at the college level teaching, but like maybe there should be some differences, changes when it applies to a teacher, like a high school and middle school teacher? Do you see how that almost like the concept of syllabus changes through this age gap or difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm finding that too, is that, you know, as CS has been introduced more and more in high schools,
Hi, this is Nahi.
Students are walking in with more like coding experience. We definitely pitched and like framed the project at a sort of college level. And I mean, that just also speaks to our own experience. Like I haven't taught high school, so I'm not the person to write that book. But, you know, in my experience, like, and when I'm teaching at an undergrad level, again, folks are kind of coming out of high school. They're not sure what direction they're going. They don't have a good kind of understanding of the different disciplines that they might want to go into. And so I find I have to be a lot more specific with the curriculum and like really break things down and scaffold things much more than at a graduate level, where I think you're expecting people to sort of have more of a direction and have sort of questions that they're already trying to address in whatever work they're doing. So I think that's, and I imagine high school, then you would have to be probably even more specific when you're framing up assignments or trying to lead students through creative work, where you can't just be like, you know, make a generator, off you go, right? Like you would have to, I would imagine, scaffold that with a lot more exercises around what generativity means and like what rule-based work means. Yeah, what else? I think, and then I think just on the comment of like, what do you do as students come in with more technical skills, and you don't need to necessarily, like sometimes, you know, I've had folks come in from like CS high schools and they're probably better programmers than me. And you do have that moment in week one where you're like, it's going to be an interesting semester. What are we doing? And I think that, but I think it's an interesting challenge because it means this question of like, why we're doing this, how you think conceptually, how do you come up with a good like creative response? What does it mean to be an artist or a designer? I think that then has to become the emphasis, right? And the how is sort of taken care of a little bit more. So I try to push them conceptually much more, right? And that means like readings, exposing them to the field, being tough in critiques around like this question of why they're making something, what is it they're making, what are the questions being asked, what are the creative strategies in their work? Because again, like you might be a genius coder and then those questions then become very like difficult, and often you're not very like, you haven't developed those kinds of skills and muscles in your previous work. So yeah, it becomes more art school in the tradition of art school, right? Where you go into art school, you know how to draw and paint a little bit. There's some honing of that, but like it's not like you're walking in never having done those things before. And the point of that education experience is to create that unique point of view for yourself.
Thank you, Tia. Yeah, I was thinking about back in 2022 we ran a community survey for through the Processing Foundation, and there were questions that were specific to teachers or educators, and one of them was like, yeah, what is the most challenging part of teaching for you? And I think one of the top answers, they were from a selection, so there's a bias too, but it was the disparity of levels between students within a class, and you touched upon that a little bit, but I'm curious if you can elaborate a bit on that, and like how do you deal with this challenge when teaching?
Yeah, a very common problem. We found that like that's just such a classic teaching new media arts problem. That one of our interview questions was, how do you manage that kind of bimodal classroom? And so there are a range of responses from everyone in the book about different techniques for doing that. But sort of like, I guess I'd sort of lean on the previous response I made, where the folks who are really skilled technically, I try to I give them more freedom in terms of what tools and how they're responding to the assignments that I'm giving them, right? Like, so if they're really brilliant at JavaScript and they know it all, like I invite them to look at other environments if they want to, just as a way so that they're not just kind of spinning their wheels with that. But also I like try to really emphasize, like try to critique and evaluate their work based on these other parameters, right? So like, you know, the aesthetic qualities of the work, the conceptual questions, like what are the research looking like? Are they like doing a deep dive into the sort of media art field? But it's difficult, right? Because, you know, there's only one of you and there's 20 of them, and, you know, 5 of them are brilliant coders and they're sitting there bored, and then the other 15 are sitting there confused, and like, it's not easy. That is not easy. So, you know, I think there's other little tricks that a lot of the folks shared in the interviews around, like, you know, pairing up people who are good coders with the weak coders and not letting the good coders touch the computer. You only let the weak coders touch the computer, and so everyone's talking then, like just practical things like that that I found helpful to sort of hear.
I like that. Yeah, that we tried something. I'm hosting these creative coding meetup or co-hosting in Berlin, and we've been doing that for a while. And there's actually an assignment that I remembered from illustration class that we adapted to creative coding, and it has like we were thinking exactly along those lines. We call it the copycat game. The original assignment was that our teacher gave us some postcards that she got from various museums, so artworks of all kinds, like physical or paintings or other things. And one person at the table had to describe it to the others, and they would need to draw what they understood of the description, which is great. It's a great exercise for illustration. And so we do the same, but with creative coding. And usually it's like two people sitting on either side of the table, like, or four around the table, and teams of two. And ideally you pair one more experienced coder with somebody who's a beginner. And maybe, you know, the only thing they get to do is to describe it if they really don't know any coding, but at least they participated in some way, or they can start to discuss what they understand and how it should look like. And typically, like, you pick something from bees and bombs, or some, like, you know, geometric animation, something relatively simple, which always ends up being more complicated than you thought it was. But it's super interesting then at the end to compare also, like, what the original thing was and what they finally did. And it takes a little while, but it's a fun exercise. I can definitely recommend it as a multimodal or bimodal, like you said, activity.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we do have some visuals of that I can share. Anyway, I also yeah, we still have a few minutes. I feel bad.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
To interrupt. There's also there's a section where we collected prompts from our community around, like, exercises about computing where there are no computers. So we didn't exactly have that variation, but yeah, there are different drawing exercises and things that are lovely to do, kind of also as icebreakers and so forth on the first day.
Yeah, I love the also, like, kind of embodied activities. I know
Yeah.
we tried some stuff where it was like almost like an improv exercise where you had to write an algorithm for the group to perform together. It's like when one person shouts a certain word, then do this action and so on. Yeah, that's super interesting. It always breaks, and then you kind of have to understand that the machine is not doing exactly what you wanted. Anyway, Ambika, you had a question.
Yeah, it was just so basically in all our creative coding communities here in India, every young person wants to now be at NYU or IMA or one of these courses. And I can see that many of them get admitted, and also now there's a high affordance for younger people to be able to go, because, you know, India has now become fairly wealthy in some aspects. So I just wanted to get a sense from you, like, and Shiji just now shared that Carnatic clock as well. So I wanted to know, like, how has, and you've been writing the book for so long, like, have there been like shifts in terms of how you're teaching with like this larger cultural influx of people from across the world? Or have you kind of documented it some way?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I mean, at the beginning of the project, you know, like the projects always get more complicated as you're going along, right? Where we're like, you know, arts and programming, great. Yeah, we'll just like all just draw in our community, cool. And then as the years went on, we were like, oh my God, this is so like American centered, and like we don't have good examples from the rest of the world. And yeah, like what is happening in India and China and these other big places, big communities of educators working. And you know, that is something that we haven't, like, that's not well discussed in the text. We have, obviously, just because of our position, it is sort of very focused on North America. And so I would say, yes, would love to see more work about what education looks like in those different contexts, because I do think, you know, obviously.
Oh, I think my question was more like what happens when they go there.
Oh, what happens when students come to us?
Yeah, because I think the influx is quite a bit now.
Yeah,
you know,
it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think obviously, like, I see a lot of work that comes from, you know, folks who have international students from China who are responding to like issues locally from their, you know, experience. And you know, that can be challenging because like they've got a whole lot of cultural references that, you know, a lot of the faculty here aren't super familiar with. And so I don't know. I think that's something we're all actually dealing with at the moment, is like, how do we deal with those different perspectives in our classroom, and how do you sort of broaden a curriculum to be less, I guess, centered here in the US, which is, you know, what I was trying to say before, I think. Yeah, it's a very good question. I agree, Jin. I don't know. I'm interested, yeah, like if others in the group have insight. Or
I mean, I have very little context because of my lack of higher education, but you know, but because there's so many of them, they come up to me and they're like, oh, we want to go study, and many of them have the means now. Like even in a generation of like span of 6 to 8 years, I can see the difference. So I just thought that, you know, like, how can we kind of steward them to the right places? Because for us, whatever is happening in the West is always, you know, the best. Like, so, and then, you know, so for us to tell them that, hey, maybe prefer XYZ university over XY, you know, it's like, it's not like I want to discourage people from studying wherever they want to, but at least they should be able to have the right resources. So.
Yeah, I feel like I can share some things about this because I think, you know, broadly speaking, I think Tega, you and I teaching a institution that's somewhat similar in terms of like population and just like student objectives and stuff like that. But at Parsons Design Technology, which also has like a huge population of students from India, like just generally like Southeast Asia and East Asia. This is like something that me and Catherine, my collaborator, have been contemplating for a very long time. Like, where do we anchor the politics of this class? You know, it's very complicated because I think to summarize, as a starting point, what we have decided is that there's no such thing as a kind of like hover over global international politics we can anchor on. Whatever politics it is, it's going to be either defined by, you know, a national boundary with its legal policies and systems, or transnational politics, and we can talk about that. So it's also like constantly battling with like just like the amount of time we have in a semester. You know, it's like you have this much time, you have to teach code, you have to teach politics, you have to teach culture. Like it's like there's no way to cover. I mean, it's arrogant. It would be arrogant to try to cover all these countries or culture at the same time. We can't go deep, and we're just gonna be brushing over. It's that in itself can be like an entire PhD, right? And so I think basically what we have landed on, and it's not perfect, you know, I don't know if there is a perfect way to do this, is we are going to root in a lot of the US political discourse, right? Because the question is, are we simply just not going to talk about, are we going to remove Roha Benjamin reading because that's not necessarily like the population in this class, right? Are we going to remove like Safia Noble, like these readings that we think are canonical or important for this course? So basically, like introduce intersectional feminism as a kind of anchor for the politics of computation within our class. But then, you know, like I think for us, it's like about prompting and questioning. Like, okay, so you know, say, you know, like Ruha Benjamin is talking about surveillance, like with like facial tracking. How can you think of examples from your own culture or your own lived experience that is similar or different or parallel to that? So that's kind of like how we approach that. Like we still have like an anchoring of like who's talking about, but then like have them contribute and kind of come back and teach us like how that relates or not relate with like their own context. But it's hard work. It's like it's like there's a lot of like space holding to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, so this has been an incredible session, and I know we have had a tendency to go over with our time because we really enjoy chatting, and we're gonna really try to not do that this time because we will have another town hall, and there's so many more times after this. But I still want to invite everyone's voice into the room. I know we've been chatting on the thing, but just to do a very quick checkout. We're gonna cut the prompt down to I say a 1 or 2 word checkout, but it really is a sentence. But let's try to just kind of any reflections, any things that are kind of coming up. Just say your name and maybe your pronoun and just a 1 or 2 word checkout. And my deepest gratitude to everyone for participating. And thank you, Raphael, for shepherding our ship today, moderating. Incredible. And yeah, we'll just popcorn it. So whoever'd like to start and then popcorn it to the next person, and we'll try our best to do this in the next 3 minutes.
I can volunteer. I just forgot what exactly I need to say, which is
just name, pronoun, 1 word, how you doing, how you're feeling, what you're thinking.
yeah, I'm Roxanne, she, her. How I'm feeling pretty good. It's really early over here. There's that. But then yeah, I'm glad that stuff like this exists. So this is cool. I am currently about to start orientation for a MFA program where I'm doing all creative code stuff at UCLA. So all of this stuff is very prevalent, and that's how I'm feeling. So should I popcorn it to a person? I think okay. I can popcorn it to Dora.
Hi, I'm Dora. I'm one of the pros grantees. My pronouns are she, her. Yeah, this session has been great for me. I recently started teaching like a web development class for emerging media artists at CUNY, and it's my first time teaching, and it's also online. So it's been kind of tough, like trying to figure out how to keep creatives engaged online and teach them how to code. So, but I feel like I have lots of inspiration from all the resources that was provided today. Thank you. I will popcorn to Rupa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rupa. I am a Processing Foundation Fellow. My pronouns are she, her. Always really grateful to hear from you, Tega, and I'm also really grateful to hear from Ambika today. And it's just giving me a lot to think about. I've been teaching creative coding for a long time at the college level, but I am recently in a relatively new situation where instead of teaching to a bunch of students who have the technical background, I'm teaching to a lot of people who are coming in from like more traditional arts, like drawing and painting and ceramics. And so a lot of the questions and the struggles that I've had today has kind of made me realize that it's actually not so much that they're different questions. It's just a matter of thinking holistically and reframing myself and thinking about kind of very kind of common and universal questions that kind of might need to be approached in a more localized way. So really grateful for the session today. I will popcorn to Luis.
Okay. Thank you, Rupa. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy about my nickname is Luis. My pronouns are he, him. Thank you for this opportunity. I was having classes at the university right now, but I managed to follow this meeting. I'm here. Also, I want to seize the opportunity to introduce my friend who is working with me on my project, Jackie. She's one of my best friends. So we are together, like thinking about the translations for my project is about creating videos for the Brazilian deaf community in sign language. So like this meeting was very important because of the pedagogical aspects of teaching code. So I'm just really happy about everything, and thank you so much. I'll pop popcorn to Buffy.
Thanks, Louise. I'm Buffy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fellow, processing fellow. I needed today. Yeah, I feel satisfied. Tsige and I had a meeting earlier this week, and I was talking a little bit about the failure process, and I was like, "Hi, can someone help me? Can you connect me to someone who can help me through the constructing? Because it keeps failing, and I'm like, what am I doing?" And as an artist, I had a performance last night. This is more than one word. I had a performance last night. Nothing worked, but everything worked the way it needed to, which is like kind of the process. So I got to remind myself through performance that that's also the same in this context too. When the shit doesn't work, you got to respect that to a certain extent and then figure out how you work from that. So we're there. Thank you. Who's going? David?
Hey, I'm David. Thanks, Buffy. I use he, him pronouns, and pedagogy is the word I guess I came away with because I also just started teaching at the intersection of STEM and design and a course on green roof ecology. So this has me thinking about all the ways in which different people come together around things that they're not familiar with, and also that I have to fly by the seat of my pants trying to figure out how to teach them. So yeah, pedagogy. This was good for that. Thanks all. Who is not gone yet? Oh, did we get?
Think that's everyone just leaves us processing folks.
Yeah,
Tega.
go for it, Tega. Good to see you.
No,
Thanks for
I think
this. Yeah,
I think my words can be grateful as
yeah.
well. I'm just so grateful for the work you're all doing. It's so wonderful. And, you know, we also rely on, like, as us as teachers using these tools every year, we just really rely on all the projects that come out of the fellowship program and that are supported by the Processing Foundation. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today and for being so generous with your time and knowledge. Really appreciate it. Yeah, our next town hall would be on October 12th, and it will be about archival. And I can tease as a special treat for the people who stuck around longer, or who were able to, that our guest will be Margit Rosen, who is the lead of archival at ZKM. That's an institution that is quite known to people in Germany, but also a little beyond in media arts. They do a lot of conservation of early media art artifacts, and I had the chance to hear Margit talk at a conference in Berlin a few months ago, and that was absolutely insightful and inspiring. So I'm very excited about this one too. And I think we have a facilitator as well. Did we confirm, Tsige?
Yes, and it's going to be so exciting when you get more details about that soon. Wait, it's going to be great.
Yeah, we need to keep a little bit of a little bit of mystery and mystique around those. So we'll see you then. And in the meantime, of course, on Discord, you can ping either of us, Tsige or myself there, or even Shin. And very much looking forward to seeing you all again. And have a great rest of your weekend.